Retail sales per capita have fallen to the lowest level in 2 years. The government floats the idea of a lower corporate tax rate, and convenience stores are winning over customers from the big supermarkets. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Wednesday, the 29th of May, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, today is, of course, a very exciting day. It is Wednesday, which means there is a newsletter out today, a Fear and Greed newsletter. It's not too late, is it, to sign up?
No, it's not. If you get your name in, if you sign up before about 10 a.m. or so, I think you'll get today's newsletter. So please go and do it, fearandgreed.com.au.
It's easy. It is that straightforward. Just fearandgreed.com.au. Put your email address in, and about 10:30, 11 o'clock, somewhere around there, you will get Sean's thoughts on a whole bunch of topics. Here you get the news on this podcast in the newsletter.
Yeah, you get the views.
It is Aylmer Unleashed. Do not miss it. Also, something else not to miss, your interview after the show today with Todd Hoare, Head of Public Markets at LGT Crestone.
Yes, this is one of those interviews. Mostly when I do an interview, I have an idea of what the response is going to be to most of my questions. Not this one. This is one of those interviews that made me realise how little I knew about what I was talking about, which is good because there's nothing like going into an interview and learning a lot from it. And that's exactly what it was like with Todd. We talk all about the different companies in Australia that are looking to push overseas, the ones that do well and the ones that don't. So think Lend-Lease, BHP. Then we have a bunch of the medical companies that we talk about. We talk a bunch of the tech companies as well, why the banks haven't been able to do it. It is a great chat. He knows his stuff, and Todd knows exactly why companies are successful overseas. And we go into all that. It's really, really interesting.
It is an absolute ripper, and it is well worth a listen after the show. It is, I reckon it's up there as one of the best interviews so far this year, Sean.
Oh, that's big. Is that because we're talking about something I knew nothing about? I thought I knew a lot about the subject until Todd started talking, and I suddenly thought, maybe I'm a little bit lacking in knowledge here. Go, Todd.
No, I just love the fact that it's so many companies, and he really illustrated the point. I learned an awful lot, as clearly you did too. Anyway, on with the show. Sean, the main story this morning, retail sales have fallen to their lowest level in 2 years when measured on a per capita basis, highlighting just how tough it is for households and many businesses, obviously struggling with high interest rates and cost of living pressures.
Retail turnover rose 0.1% in April, following a 0.4% fall in March. For the year, sales were up just 1.3%. But if you include the impact of more people in the country due to net immigration, we've had plenty of that, then per capita sales went backwards. The ABS said consumers are reducing discretionary spending, and the biggest falls came in clothing, footwear and personal accessories. The Bureau said looking across the last couple of months, there is weak underlying spending in most parts of the retail industry. The story that has emerged in recent months is that younger Australians are cutting back sharply while older Australians are still spending. That in large part reflects the cost of housing. Higher housing costs, think rents, mortgages, are hitting younger Australians much harder. It isn't a surprise. Higher interest rates are supposed to slow spending. And the Reserve Bank has noted that it's the household sector that is suffering most. But that's cold comfort for people out there trying to pay rent or insurance bills, any of those sorts of things. The X factor about to hit the economy, of course, is the Stage 3 tax cuts from 1 July. What will people do with the extra money? Certainly people are hurting at the moment. Interest rates are working, and that's why it's very unlikely that the Reserve Bank will lift rates again.
Sean, we talk plenty about how hard it is for households. We talk about how hard it is really for consumers, but this is hurting business as well.
Sure is. We've had a run of consumer-facing brands downgrade their earnings outlook over the past fortnight. Yesterday, it was the turn of car dealer Peter Warren Automotive. That group, which operates in 80 locations and sells makes including Toyota, Mazda, Volkswagen and Mercedes, said customer demand for new vehicles is falling sharply. Other companies to downgrade recently or warn of lower value consumer purchases include Babcorp, which owns Autobarn, Burson and Midas, Baby Bunting, Endeavour Group, which owns Dan Murphy's, Coles, Wesfarmers, which of course owns Bunnings, JB Hi-Fi, Super Retail did it, Temple & Webster. In fact, over the past week, the consumer discretionary sub-index of the ASX 200, which captures many of these retailers, is the worst performing of the 11 sub-indices. So households are hurting, but so too are businesses and many retail businesses.
So that's over the last week. How about yesterday? How did local markets perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed down 0.3% to 7,767 points, with industrials and utilities leading the market lower. Consumer staple stocks outperformed. Given Wall Street was closed the previous night, there was no lead-in. Trading was pretty quiet, Michael. The banks were mixed. The big miners were flat. Wesfarmers, Goodman Group and Telstra all lost around 0.5%. Macquarie was off around 1%. Transurban 1.6%. Higher metals prices helped some of the miners, or the big diversified miners, South32, for example, outperformed. The gold stocks, including Northern Star and De Grey Mining, did pretty well. In corporate news, medical software darling Pro Medicus announced 5 new contract wins in the US. That meant its share price jumped 1%. Southern Cross Media said it's considering an Australian community media proposal that Southern Cross buy Australian community media assets, including a portfolio of 14 of its daily print and digital news publications, key regional metro titles, and its agricultural division. It says the talks are preliminary with no certainty of a deal. What I like about this one is normally you have a bidder bidding for assets. In this case, it's the asset owner coming in saying, why don't you bid for us? A little bit reverse there. Shares in uranium miner Boss Energy fell 11% following Chief Executive Duncan Craib selling stock worth $21 million. It was the worst performer among the top 200 yesterday. In Westpac-owned mortgage broking franchise Rams Financial is under investigation and could face penalties related to home loans written over a 4-year period in which franchisees might have flouted credit rules, including around responsible lending.
All right, what about international markets?
Well, Michael, I've got to tell you a little story here.
Oh dear. I'm sorry. I should be more upbeat about this, but it does sound like I'm about to cop a lesson from you.
Well, it's kind of I suppose I sort of knew about this, but it wasn't until like the last 24 hours that I kind of got my head across it. It's kind of hard to believe that in 2024, but every trade on the New York Stock Exchange settles or finalizes in 2 days' time. It's sort of like the following day, so basically 48 hours' time. So even though, we can transfer money between mobiles instantly, the stock exchange takes 2 days. Isn't that quite remarkable in 2024?
Seems very, very old school. I mean,
Yes.
we are such a digital kind of world now.
Yes.
Surely that can be sped up a little bit.
Well,
what can you do about this, Sean?
Yes. From last night, in fact, it changed to 24 hours. Or what's known in the industry as T+1. Now, it used to be T+1 until the 1920s. Then the volume of trading surged. That's really when share markets took off in the US. Far too many paper-based transactions, so it became T+5, 5 days.
Whoa.
Then, that was 1920. That's fair enough. It took a while to do.
Yeah, but it went from T+1 to T+5. I guess the volume kind of did, but still, that's a big jump up.
Yeah, I think so. Then the Black Monday crash in 1987, people realised it needs to be faster than 5 days, so it became T+3, then T+2 in 2017. Finally, the New York Stock Exchange has entered the modern era last night with same-day trading. Not instantaneous, mind you, but same day. Now, in Australia, we operate on a T+2 basis. It is pretty archaic, don't you reckon?
Well, surely we will look back on this in, say, a decade or 2 decades' time when things will be instantaneous and go, can you believe that back in 2024 we were celebrating the shift to kind of
24 hours? Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's quite, yeah. Anyway, I just found that quite fascinating. In terms of numbers, oil and gold were both a bit higher over the past 24 hours. Aussie dollar is trading around 66.7 US cents.
I love the fact that you busted out a very random piece of trivia. That is great.
Yeah, it is. I reckon you could use that as the trivia master at the next pub quiz you're overseeing.
I was actually thinking that. I'm just here doing research, just multitasking as we go. I'm going to put all of my attention, though, on the rest of this podcast and none on pub trivia. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Industry Minister Ed Husic has called for a lower corporate tax rate, either by cutting it or through using other incentives such as an investment allowance.
It is significant that a Labor minister is advocating change, given that in opposition, the party has generally fought against lower taxes for companies. In 2018, the Turnbull government tried to cut the corporate tax rate to 25% for all companies, not just small businesses, but it failed. The current tax rate for large businesses is 30%. Mr. Husek said, given wages are rising again, it would be politically easier to do today, that is, cut the tax rate, than it would have been pre-pandemic. He said businesses need to be able to invest and free up capital, and a lower tax rate could do that. Now, in the May 14 budget, Treasurer Jim Chalmers opted for production tax credits for critical minerals and hydrogen, as well as an extension of the instant asset write-off scheme for small businesses, rather than broader corporate tax relief. As you can imagine, yesterday the opposition jumped on it, talking about a split within the government over tax policy. I don't think that, but it's very interesting that Labor's talking about it.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, federal parliament is back in session this week with question time being dominated by the issue of non-citizen criminals who have had their visas restored.
Immigration Minister Andrew Giles says he will urgently consider overturning a number of recent administrative appeals tribunal decisions which allowed visa holders to stay in Australia despite committing serious crimes. Opposition leader Peter Dutton asked Mr Giles about a case of a New Zealand citizen who was allowed to stay in Australia despite raping his stepdaughter. Mr Giles said he had cancelled the man's visa and it remained cancelled by the Department of Home Affairs before the tribunal ruled otherwise. Now, much of the criticism from the opposition comes from the tribunal's interpretation of Ministerial Direction 99, which says significant weighting must be given to a person's ties to Australia. So, for instance, a New Zealander who has lived most of their life in Australia might be allowed to stay under that direction. Mr Giles says Direction 99 does not decrease the importance of protecting the community from crime. Also, Michael, yesterday the federal government announced a new expert group to conduct a rapid review into the prevention of violence against women.
Sean, a couple of high-profile companies are in the middle of sexual harassment scandals, with both Nine Entertainment and Country Road Group fighting some pretty shocking allegations.
In the Nine case, former news director Darren Wick allegedly sexually harassed a number of women at Nine. He stepped down from the role in March this year, but according to media reports, received a $1 million plus payout when he left. Nine newspapers yesterday reported that the publicity chief of Stan, a Nine subsidiary, left the business weeks after an investigation into allegations of his workplace behaviour. The allegation is that it's inappropriate workplace conduct. At Country Road Group, two highly placed executives have left and the global boss is flying to Australia to address staff to announce an external investigation into the handling of complaints at the retailer's Melbourne headquarters. According to the Australian, staff have complained of feeling unsafe.
Commonwealth Bank Chief Executive Matt Comyn says artificial intelligence will reshape the workforce over the medium and longer term, but he's downplayed its benefits for the lender in the short term.
Mr Comyn, speaking at an AFR conference, pointed to comparisons of artificial intelligence with advances made during the agricultural and industrial revolutions. While there will be reshaping of businesses over the medium and long terms, it isn't clear exactly now what skills are needed to help with that change. He said it's important to distinguish between the hype, which we're hearing about today, and pragmatism around the future, saying you don't jump from a horse and buggy to a Tesla. Very true. Mr Comyn said Commonwealth Bank was using generative AI to improve the customer experience, adding that it is being used in an assistant capacity, but that overall the uses are relatively small in the grand scheme of things.
Sean, how about this one? I think you'll like this one. More people are using local petrol stations or convenience stores to stock up on fresh food, snacks and groceries, eating into the supermarket sector.
That's according to a new report from the Australian Association of Convenience Stores. Fast, convenient and fresh food sales are rising, although tobacco sales, which is a critical item at surveys, are dropping. Australia's convenience stores, led by brands such as 7-Eleven, Ampol, BP, Coles Express, recorded a 3.1% rise in sales, including a 12.6% jump in food and beverages last year, outstripping the big supermarkets. The total number of convenience retail outlets grew by around 1.5% to 7,357 stores last year. Food is now a much bigger seller than petrol at these organisations.
What?
Yeah, for 2023, total food and beverage was about $6 billion. Non-food sales, such as fuel and tobacco, was just $4.3 billion. Anyway, people are using it for food more than petrol, and they're gaining market share on the big grocers.
So clearly, we are talking about more than just buying the $2 coffee and a Boost bar. But Boost is really the only chocolate bar that people should be buying in a convenience store.
Yeah, so I don't want to disagree with you, but you are wrong. It's not all about Mars bar, Chiquitos, definitely.
Chiquitos?
Yeah, Chiquitos.
You are kidding.
You can't buy Chiquitos anywhere but convenience stores, I think, nowadays.
Oh my God, I reckon you've just busted out the most divisive of chocolates. I think we've just found the only person in Australia who still buys Chiquitos.
So I'm not a big chocolate eater, but I do eat dark chocolate, and I really like mint dark chocolate. So Kit Kat have just recently come out with a dark mint chocolate. And so that is certainly, but the only kind of white or light chocolate, I suppose, that I really enjoy is a Chiquito bar.
There you go.
And I don't know whether it's a throwback from school or something or other from many years ago, but if I'm not eating dark chocolate, a bit of a Chiquito fan.
I've learned something about you today. I mean, I've learned many things about you during this podcast. My favorite thing is the fact that you don't like hot chips. There's just the most un-Australian thing I've ever heard. Anyway, that's not relevant. I was just trying to include that.
I don't think we've ever come across a junk food that you don't like.
No, I'm the man of the people. I'll eat anything. Anyway, moving on. This isn't about me, Sean. It's about you. Optus has upped its postpaid mobile phone plans for new customers with prices up to 6% higher.
The country's second largest telco wasn't expected to lift its prices until new chief executive Stephen Roux started in November. However, they did it yesterday. Vodafone increased its prices by about 9% in March. Analysts are now waiting to see what Telstra's response is. Remember last week at an investor day, they changed the rules about how they're going to price mobile plans. So people are expecting Telstra to come on board and do something as well.
Turning to international news now, Sean, an Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has vowed to continue the war against Hamas amid international condemnation of an airstrike that killed scores of Palestinians in Rafah over the weekend.
At least 45 people were killed, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, while hundreds more were treated for severe burns, fractures and shrapnel wounds. Mr. Netanyahu said the strike was a tragic mishap. But, according to the BBC, he added that, "I don't intend to end the war before every goal has been achieved." Mr. Netanyahu said it was vital that Israel took every precaution possible to protect civilians and insisted that the Israel Defense Forces were using their best efforts not to harm those uninvolved in the conflict. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the strike had killed scores of innocent civilians who were only seeking shelter from this deadly conflict. He added, "There is no safe place in Gaza. This horror must stop."
And finally, Sean, thousands of residents were ordered to evacuate from the path of a still active landslide in Papua New Guinea yesterday after parts of a mountain collapsed, burying an initial estimate of more than 2,000 people.
Relief teams in the Pacific Nation have been trickling into the difficult-to-access northern Enga region since Friday, though officials said the odds of finding survivors are slim, according to Reuters. Residents said they've been using shovels and bare hands to search for survivors. A state of emergency has been declared across the disaster zone and a neighbouring area. In total, there's up to 8,000 people in that region. Heavy equipment and aid has been slow to arrive because of the remote location, treacherous terrain and tribal unrest in the area, forcing the military to escort the convoys of relief teams.
Okay, now up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. Your guest today is Todd Hoare, Head of Public Markets at LGT Crestone.
Yes, we do a stock take of the companies that have expanded, the Australian companies that have expanded overseas, and then Todd gives us his view about whether they've done it well or not. It is a fascinating chat.
Yeah, it is a really good one. It is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist. Or you can find it at fearandgreed.com.au, which is also, of course, where you can sign up for the Fear and Greed newsletter, which comes out in a mere few hours' time, Sean.
It does. It's very exciting. But do you know what's out right now that you don't have to wait for? You don't have to wait.
I know. I have a hunch. I know where you're going with this. Would it be, how do they afford that, Sean?
It is. How do they afford that about today, Michael?
Well, Sean, thank you for asking. This week, Canna Campbell and I get it because obviously, how do they afford that? It's our sister podcast where we talk all about personal finance and making your money work harder for you. We're talking about spending today, and we are talking about, would you believe, mindful spending? Are you a mindful spender, Sean, or are you just a bit of an impulse buyer?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. You go into 7-Eleven and come out with 18 Chiquitos.
Yeah,
I know you.
I'm impulse through and through.
Anyway, today's a really interesting insight into mindful spending. And basically, it's all about trying to help kind of stick to your budget and keep kind of expenses within a manageable kind of range. And so we talk about a few different strategies and tactics for that one, all under the fairly kind of loosey-goosey or kind of woo-woo kind of topic of mindful spending. But anyway, Sean, I would still class it as a must-listen. Every episode of How Do They Afford That is a must-listen. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Wednesday, the 29th of May, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and X. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.